I'm Jonathon Lusthaus from the University of Oxford. I'm in the Sociology department where I'm director of the Human-Cybercriminal project. So the offline dimension of cybercrime is actually surprisingly important. So as much as I talk about how they trust each other in an online environment, one of the things I discovered over the course of this study was actually a surprising number of people who know each other in person. So whether they met online originally and over time sort of got to know each other and felt more comfortable exchanging personal information and then eventually meeting up, or in other cases, it could be people who actually grew up together, who came from the same communities, the same schools, or the same universities, who really have that long tradition of knowing each other. And this offline dimension, while not present in all cases, is actually very important to still a number of cases where we have potentially groups operating together for longer periods of time than they could sustain online, and probably reaching higher degrees of trust because these are people who are well known to each other. And even to the point you get to see some structures that start to look like technology companies that operate out of office space that really are like startups in a number of respects. They have clear hierarchies, they have this office space, people sometimes have an awareness of them as a company. They might not always know what exactly that it is that they do and the criminal aspects of this, but ultimately the look and feel of some of these cybercriminal ventures in this offline setting, it very much looks and feels like businesses. Organized crime plays an interesting role in cybercrime. I think coming into this study, and it's probably the suspicion of a lot of people, I expected to find quite a large role that they would play, and particularly a role around protecting cybercriminals and their operations. Because this is what you see conventionally amongst other criminals, that in the absence of a state and, as I mentioned, legal systems and things like this, they can turn to mafia members and others to help them enforce agreements. And so in cybercrime, I expected to find protection being provided to them by these organized criminals. But I didn't really find that. I found some cases of that. What I found instead was two things. One was that protection was often instead provided by law enforcement agents or politicians or other people of influence who are either potentially paid bribes or otherwise had another relationship with cybercriminals. And this was a very important way that they were protecting themselves from being arrested ultimately. But the other aspect of this is really tied less to protection and more to the role that these traditional organized crime groups play in cybercrime. And what I found more is rather than trying to regulate the industry, they were playing a role inside it. And they're particularly playing a role often around the money side of cybercrime. And this is something that ties back to what traditional organized criminals are good at, which is often money laundering, moving money, and enforcing agreements among people. And so this is an area where you're more likely to see the engagement with traditional organized crime because it's leveraging existing skill sets and resources that they've used in other aspects of crime and finding a niche for them within the cybercrime industry. Corruption is very much a local problem because it exists in a particular jurisdiction and it affects the cases within that jurisdiction. But it's also a problem that's found in many, many countries around the world. So in terms of cybercrime, corruption becomes a global problem because cybercrime is a global problem. So when you have these cases crossing boundaries, it puts a lot of pressure on law enforcement agencies in terms of investigation because it's much more difficult to gather evidence. They need to have good relationships and clear procedures between different countries in terms of the investigations. So when you hit a problem with corruption in some of these cases, it becomes very difficult for these agencies to operate and to get involved in some of these cases because what's happening is basically a protection of a criminal who might be acting against one country but is living in a different country.